His female coworker texted him, "Hope your clueless wife doesn't find out how you blush when I touch your hand. See you tonight." He laughed. Said it was just office banter. "Don't be dramatic," he told me. So I smiled and played along. This morning he woke up screaming. When he saw the note, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Hope your clueless wife doesn't find out how you blush when I touch your hand. See you tonight." I read that message on my husband Kyle's phone while folding his laundry on a Wednesday afternoon. The sender was saved as Zoe Work. When I asked him about it moments later, holding out his phone with the message still glowing on the screen, Kyle laughed. He told me it was just office banter and that I was being dramatic. So I smiled. I kissed his cheek. I went back to folding his clothes like nothing had happened. But something had changed in that moment. Something cold and sharp had settled into my chest. If Kyle wanted a clueless wife, I would give him the performance of his life. For the next 11 months, I played that role perfectly while documenting every lie, every late night, every receipt from hotels I had never visited. This morning, Kyle woke up screaming when he discovered I had known everything all along. His hands would not stop shaking when he read the note I left him. But that comes later. First, let me tell you about the day I stopped being the trusting wife and became someone else entirely. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here and listening to this story. If you believe that trust and truth matter in relationships, please consider subscribing. It helps us share more stories that resonate. Now let's see how everything unfolded. It was late September. The kind of Wednesday afternoon that feels suspended between seasons, not quite summer but not yet fall. I had taken half the day off from my job at the marketing agency where I work as a project coordinator. Nothing unusual about that. I had accumulated vacation days and needed to catch up on household tasks that always seem to pile up when both people in a marriage work full-time. Our apartment was quiet except for the hum of the dryer finishing its cycle in the small laundry closet off our kitchen. I had already folded 2 loads and was working on the third. The bedroom window was open, letting in a breeze that carried the smell of cut grass from the complex lawn 2 floors below. I could hear children playing somewhere in the distance, their voices high and carefree. Kyle was in the shower. I could hear the water running through the bathroom door, could hear him humming something tuneless the way he always did when he thought no one was listening. We had been married for 7 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years before he proposed, and got married in a small ceremony with just family and close friends. For most of those 7 years I thought we were happy. Not perfect but solid. The kind of couple that would make it for the long haul. I was pulling warm towels from the basket when his phone lit up on the nightstand. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was simply standing close enough to see the notification when it appeared on his screen. The phone was face up, unlocked, displaying the message preview in full. The words registered in my brain before I could look away. "Hope your clueless wife doesn't find out how you blush when I touch your hand. See you tonight." Below that was the name Zoe Work and a little heart emoji next to a winky face. I stood there holding one of Kyle's navy blue towels, staring at those words. My mind went blank for a moment, then started racing so fast I could barely track my own thoughts. The shower was still running. Kyle was still humming. Everything in our bedroom looked exactly as it had 5 seconds earlier. But nothing was the same. The strangest part was my reaction. I did not cry. I did not feel my hands start shaking or my knees go weak. Instead, I felt this immediate distance from the situation, as though I had somehow stepped outside my own body and was watching this moment happen to someone else. There was no panic, no wave of emotion crashing over me. Just this cold, sharp clarity that settled into the center of my chest and stayed there. I picked up his phone carefully, holding it with just my fingertips. The message was still glowing on the screen. I read it again, slower this time, analyzing each word. "Hope your clueless wife doesn't find out." She had called me clueless. This woman Zoe felt comfortable enough in whatever relationship she had with my husband to openly mock me. The casual cruelty of it was what struck me most. She was not even trying to hide the affair. She was making jokes about it. Making jokes about me. The shower turned off. I heard the curtain rings scrape against the rod. I had maybe 30 seconds before Kyle came out. I set the towel down on the bed and continued holding his phone. When the bathroom door opened and Kyle walked out wearing only his gray sweatpants, using a hand towel to dry his hair, I was standing in the same spot with his phone in my hand. His face was relaxed. Haunted. He had no idea anything had changed. I held the phone out toward him, the message still displayed on the screen. My voice came out steady when I spoke, which surprised me. Kyle, who is Zoe from work texting you about how you blush when she touches your hand? Kept my tone light. Curious rather than accusatory. The same voice I might use to ask what he wanted for dinner or whether we needed to pick up milk from the store. I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of panic or guilt. He glanced at the phone. For half a second, something flickered in his expression. Something that might have been alarm. But it disappeared so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. Then Kyle laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or the kind of forced sound someone makes when they are caught doing something wrong. It was confident, easy, genuinely amused. He waved his hand in a dismissive gesture like I was asking about something completely insignificant. It's just office banter, Danny. Don't be dramatic. The way he said that word, dramatic, landed differently than anything else he could have said. There was an edge to his voice. A subtle condescension that made it clear he thought I was overreacting. He was framing my completely reasonable concern about an inappropriate message as a personality flaw. As though being suspicious about another woman texting my husband about physical intimacy was something I should be embarrassed about. Something I should work on. I had a choice in that moment. I could push back. I could demand to see his phone, scroll through his messages with Zoe, ask questions until he gave me real answers. I could call him out on the obvious lie he had just told me. Or I could do something else entirely. I smiled at him. I nodded like his explanation made perfect sense. I even stepped forward and kissed him on the cheek, tasting the chlorine from our building's water supply on his damp skin. Okay, I said simply. I was just curious. Then I turned back to the laundry basket and picked up another towel to fold, as though the conversation had never happened. As though I believed every word he said. Kyle stood there for a moment. I could feel him watching me, perhaps surprised by how easily I had let it drop. Then he picked up his phone from where I had set it on the dresser, checked something quickly, and walked into our closet to get dressed. The moment he was out of sight, I set down the towel I was holding and sat carefully on the edge of our bed. My hands were starting to shake now, but not from fear or heartbreak. It was from the sudden rush of understanding that had crashed over me like ice water. If Kyle wanted me to be the clueless wife, I would become exactly that. I would play the role so convincingly that he would never suspect I knew anything was wrong. And while he relaxed into his comfortable lie, while he continued whatever he was doing with Zoe from work, I would be watching. Documenting. Learning every single detail. I began cataloging everything in my mind. The exact tone of his dismissive laugh. The way he had waved his hand to brush away my concern. The confidence in his voice when he called it office banter. The fact that he immediately checked his phone after I gave it back to him, probably to warn Zoe that I had seen her message. I filed all of it away in mental folders that would become physical folders very soon. The rest of that Wednesday unfolded in a strange haze of forced normalcy. I finished folding the laundry and put everything away in its proper place. I made dinner, choosing one of Kyle's favorite meals without even thinking about it. Chicken with roasted vegetables and rice. We ate together at our small kitchen table. Kyle talked about his day at work, mentioned a difficult client and a project deadline coming up next week. He did not mention anyone named Zoe. I asked follow-up questions and laughed at his stories like I always did. After dinner we watched television together on our couch. Kyle checked his phone constantly, at least a dozen times during the show. Each time he angled the screen away from me. Each time I pretended not to notice. When a notification would light up his screen, he would glance at it quickly and sometimes smile before putting the phone back down. I kept my eyes on the television and did not react. When he suggested we go to bed early, I agreed without hesitation. We followed our normal nighttime routine. We brushed our teeth side by side at the bathroom sink. We climbed into bed and he kissed me goodnight before rolling over and falling asleep within minutes. The way he always did. I lay awake beside him in the darkness, listening to his breathing even out into the steady rhythm of sleep. My mind was racing through everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. How long had this been going on? How serious was it? Was Zoe the first or had there been others? I started searching my memory for signs I had missed. Kyle had mentioned someone named Zoe a few times over the past months. Always casually, always in the context of work projects. He had been coming home later than usual on Thursday nights, usually around 9 or 10. He always blamed it on meetings or deadlines. I had never questioned it because I trusted him. Because that is what marriage is supposed to be built on. But that version of our marriage died on Wednesday afternoon while I was folding laundry. The woman who trusted blindly was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone who would watch and wait and document everything until she knew the complete truth. The next morning I woke up before Kyle. I made coffee in our small kitchen, my hands steady as I poured his cup and set it on the counter exactly where he liked it. He came out in his work clothes, kissed me on the forehead and told me he might be late that evening because of a project deadline. I smiled and told him not to work too hard. After he left, I sat alone in our apartment and made a plan. No confrontations. No emotional outbursts. Just cold, careful observation. I would document everything until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This was not about catching him anymore. This was about protecting myself and making sure that when the truth finally came out, I would have all the evidence I needed. The apartment felt different after Kyle left for work that Thursday morning. The silence was sharper somehow, more present. I stood in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee, looking at the spot where he had been standing minutes earlier, and felt the weight of the decision I had made settling over me like a physical thing. I called in sick to work. My supervisor did not question it. I had been with the agency for 4 years and rarely took unplanned time off. I told her I had a migraine and would check my email periodically. She told me to rest and not worry about anything. But rest was the last thing on my mind. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and created a new document. I titled it simply Timeline, and began writing down everything I could remember from the past few months. Every late night Kyle had mentioned. Every time he had checked his phone and angled it away from me. Every new shirt I noticed hanging in his closet that I had not seen him purchase. Every Thursday evening that stretched past 9 o'clock with explanations that always sounded reasonable in the moment but now felt hollow in retrospect. The document grew longer as the morning progressed. I wrote for nearly 2 hours, stopping only to refill my coffee. When I finally sat back and read through what I had recorded, I felt sick. The pattern had been there all along. I had just been too trusting to see it. Over the following weeks, I transformed into someone I barely recognized. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work each day, came home, made dinner, asked Kyle about his day. But underneath that performance, I was watching him with an intensity that bordered on scientific. Every behavior became data. Every conversation became evidence. The small signs I had previously ignored now stood out in sharp relief. Impossible to miss once I knew to look for them. Kyle started showering the moment he walked through our apartment door each evening. Even on days when he claimed to have spent most of his time in meetings rather than doing anything physically demanding, he would head straight to the bathroom and stay there for 20 minutes. I would hear the water running and wonder what he was washing away. What perfume or lipstick traces he was removing before facing me. He bought new cologne during his second week of my observation. I discovered it in the bathroom one morning. An expensive bottle from a brand he had never worn before. The scent was woody and sharp, nothing like the fresh, clean fragrances he typically preferred. When I asked him about it that evening, keeping my voice casual and curious, he said a colleague had recommended it. He did not specify which colleague. I did not press. I simply made a mental note of the date and the lie. His relationship with his phone evolved into something that would have been comical if it had not been so telling. The device became an extension of his body, never more than arm's reach away. He started placing it face down on every surface, a behavior he had never exhibited before. At dinner, the phone sat beside his plate like an extra guest at our table. When it buzzed with notifications, he would grab it immediately and check the screen, his face illuminated by the glow, his expression softening into something I used to think was meant for me. I tested him during one dinner, asking casually who he was texting while I was in the middle of telling him about a problem at work. He barely looked up. "Just work stuff," he said, his fingers still moving across the screen. I continued my story as though his divided attention did not bother me, but I noted the interaction in my mental catalog. Just work stuff. It was always just work stuff. The phrase became his default response, repeated so often it lost all meaning. Maintaining my performance as the devoted wife while conducting this careful surveillance was exhausting in ways I had not anticipated. We attended a dinner party at his colleague's house during my 3rd week of observation. I wore the blue dress Kyle always said he liked. I laughed at his stories, touched his arm affectionately when he made jokes, and discussed our plans to renovate the kitchen someday with enthusiasm that felt increasingly hollow with each word I spoke. Another couple at the party, James and Rebecca, approached us during dessert. Rebecca smiled at us with genuine warmth and said, "You two are so good together. 7 years and you still look at each other like newlyweds. That gives the rest of us hope." I felt Kyle's hand find mine under the table, his fingers threading through my own in a gesture that once would have made my heart swell. Now it just felt like part of the performance we were both giving, though only I knew we were acting. I smiled at Rebecca and thanked her, squeezing Kyle's hand back. "We're very lucky," I said, meaning it in a way she could not possibly understand. I was lucky to have discovered the truth before investing more years in a lie. While I was making this observation internally, Kyle checked his phone under the table with his free hand. I felt it vibrate between us. I saw the slight smile that crossed his face as he read whatever message had just arrived. The entire interaction lasted maybe 10 seconds, but I catalogued every detail. At home, I continued all the rituals of our marriage as though nothing had changed. I cooked his favorite meals without being asked. I did his laundry, folding his shirts the specific way he preferred. I asked about his day and listened to his answers with apparent interest, even though half of what he told me was probably fabricated. I gave him absolutely no reason to suspect that I knew anything was wrong. The performance was necessary. I understood this with increasing clarity as the weeks progressed. If Kyle thought I was the clueless wife Zoe had described in her message, he would continue to be careless. He would get comfortable in his deception. And comfortable people make mistakes. Mistakes I could document. Mistakes that would protect me when the time came to end this marriage on my terms rather than his. 3 weeks after I had found that first message, my older sister Emma called to say she was driving down from Boston for the weekend. She wanted to see our new couch, she said, but I knew the real reason. Emma called me every few days and I had not been myself on the phone. My responses were shorter, more distracted. She was coming to check on me in person. Emma arrived Friday evening with an overnight bag and a bottle of wine. Kyle greeted her warmly, hugging her and asking about her drive and her job and her apartment. He was good at this, at being charming and attentive with other people. It was one of the things I had fallen in love with years ago, back when I thought that charm was genuine rather than performative. Kyle left Saturday morning to run errands. The moment his car pulled out of the parking lot, Emma turned to me with her coffee mug halfway to her lips and said, "Okay, what's going on?" I was sitting across from her at our small kitchen table. Sunlight was streaming through the window behind her, making her look like she was glowing. "Nothing's going on," I said, keeping my voice level. "Why would you think something's wrong?" Emma set down her mug and leaned forward. "Danny, I've known you your entire life. You seem different. Quieter. Like you're holding something back." Her eyes searched my face with the kind of attention only a sister can have. "Are you and Kyle okay?" For a moment I considered telling her everything. About the message from Zoe. About the late Thursday nights and the new cologne and the phone that never left Kyle's hand. About the performance I had been maintaining for 3 weeks while I documented his behavior and tried to figure out what to do next. But I did not tell her. If I told Emma, she would want to confront Kyle immediately. She would want to protect me in all the loud, obvious ways that would destroy my careful observation. She would demand answers and make scenes and ruin the evidence I was building. So I lied to my sister, something I had never done before, and told her I was just tired from work. That we had a big project launching soon and I was feeling the stress. Emma did not look convinced, but she accepted the explanation. She spent the rest of the weekend watching me with concern, her eyes following me around the apartment as though she was trying to solve a puzzle she could not quite see all the pieces of. When she left Sunday afternoon, she hugged me tighter than usual and told me to call her if I needed anything. Anything at all. By the end of my first month of observation, I had identified a clear pattern that changed everything I thought I knew about Kyle's schedule. Every Thursday evening, without fail, he came home later than usual. The excuses varied, but the timing remained consistent. Project meetings that ran long. Client dinners he forgot to mention in advance. Last-minute emergencies that required his immediate attention. Thursday nights became the focus of my surveillance. I started paying special attention to how he dressed on those mornings. He wore his best shirts, the ones I had bought him for important presentations. He used more of that new cologne, the woody expensive scent that lingered in our bedroom after he left. When he came home on Thursday evenings, usually around 9 or 10, he smelled like perfume I did not wear. A floral scent that clung to his collar and his jacket. When I did his laundry on Friday mornings, I would find that smell embedded in the fabric. On one particular Thursday, I found something more concrete than observations and smells. Kyle had left his jacket draped over the back of a kitchen chair. I was hanging it in the closet when I felt something crinkle in the inside pocket. I pulled out a receipt from a hotel bar downtown. The date was from the previous Thursday. The timestamp showed 10:15 at night. 2 drinks, $38 with tip. The previous Thursday, Kyle had told me he was working late at the office on a presentation. He had texted me around 9 to say he would be home by 10:30. According to this receipt, he had not been at the office. He had been at a hotel bar downtown buying drinks for someone at 10:15. I stood in our bedroom holding that receipt, feeling the paper between my fingers. My hands were completely steady. I took a photo of it with my phone, making sure the date and time and location were all clearly visible. Then I carefully folded the receipt and placed it back in his jacket pocket exactly where I had found it. I went to my laptop and opened the folder I had created and labeled Network Security. Inside were subfolders organized by date, each containing photos and notes and timeline entries. I added the receipt photo to the appropriate date folder and updated my timeline document with this new information. The evidence was building. Each day brought new observations, new inconsistencies, new pieces of a puzzle I was slowly assembling. And through it all, I maintained my performance as the clueless wife who noticed nothing and suspected even less. I stared at that hotel bar receipt on my laptop screen for a long time after I saved it to my evidence folder. The photo was perfectly clear. The date, the time, the location, the 2 drinks totaling $38. Everything documented. Everything preserved. But I knew receipts and observations would only take me so far. I needed access to the source. I needed to see what Kyle was saying to Zoe and what she was saying back. I needed the actual messages, the real conversations, not just the circumstantial evidence I was piecing together from cologne bottles and Thursday night patterns. The problem was I had no idea how to access that information without Kyle knowing. I was competent enough with technology for everyday tasks, but mirroring someone's phone or accessing their private accounts was beyond my skill set. I needed help from someone who understood digital systems the way I understood project timelines and client presentations. I needed someone I could trust completely. I called Sarah on Monday evening while Kyle was in the shower. Sarah Mitchell had been my best friend since our sophomore year of college when we were randomly assigned as roommates. She was the person who held my hair back when I got food poisoning junior year. The person who helped me pick out my wedding dress. The person who knew me well enough to hear something wrong in my voice even when I was trying to sound normal. Sarah worked in digital forensics for a private investigation firm downtown. Her job involved recovering data from computers and phones for legal cases, corporate investigations, and occasionally divorce proceedings. She had told me stories over the years about the things she discovered in people's devices. The double lives people led that existed entirely in digital form until someone like Sarah made them visible. We agreed to meet Tuesday morning at our usual coffee shop. A small place halfway between our apartments that made excellent lattes and had comfortable chairs by the window. I told Kyle I was meeting Sarah for coffee before work. He barely looked up from his phone when I mentioned it. I arrived at the coffee shop first and ordered both our drinks. Sarah walked in 10 minutes later wearing her work clothes, a blazer over dark jeans and a messenger bag slung across her shoulder. She spotted me by the window and smiled. But the smile faded slightly when she got close enough to see my face clearly. We hugged and she sat down across from me, accepting the latte I had ordered for her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Sarah just looked at me with those sharp brown eyes that missed very little. "Okay," she said finally. "What's going on?" I had rehearsed this conversation in my head a dozen times, but now that the moment had arrived, my carefully prepared words felt inadequate. I took a breath and started with the excuse I had planned. "I'm worried about our home network security. I think someone might be accessing our cloud storage without permission." It was a flimsy cover story and we both knew it. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying my face. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Danny, it's me. You don't have to do this." I felt something crack in my chest. For 6 weeks I had maintained perfect control over my emotions. I had played the role of the clueless wife without breaking character once. But sitting across from my best friend, seeing the concern and understanding in her eyes, I felt that control slip. "I need to know what's on Kyle's phone," I said quietly. Can you help me? Sarah did not ask for details or explanations. She simply nodded, pulled her laptop out of her messenger bag and opened it on the table between us. For the next 45 minutes she walked me through the technical process of accessing our shared cloud accounts, checking device activity logs, and setting up mirroring for phones connected to our wireless network at home. She explained everything in a calm, professional voice, the same tone she probably used when testifying in court cases about digital evidence. She showed me how to see what devices were backing up to our shared storage, how to access those backups without leaving traces that someone had viewed them, how to set up real-time mirroring so that messages sent and received on Kyle's phone would also appear on my laptop. This is legal because it's your shared network and your shared accounts, Sarah said at one point, her fingers moving across her keyboard as she demonstrated another technique. But Danny, once you see what's there, you can't unsee it. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought about that question. Was I sure? Part of me wanted to go back to being the woman I was 7 weeks ago, the one who trusted her husband and believed his explanations and did not spend her evenings cataloging evidence of betrayal. But that woman was gone. That version of my life was already over. All that remained was finding out the complete truth. I'm sure, I said. When we finished, Sarah closed her laptop and squeezed my hand across the table. Whatever you find, I'm here. Day or night. You call me and I will come. Do you understand? I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady if I tried to speak. We finished our coffee and walked out together into the bright Tuesday morning. Sarah hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, holding on a little longer than usual, and then drove off toward her office downtown. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine, processing what I was about to do. Then I drove to work and spent the day in meetings and answering emails, acting as though nothing significant had happened that morning. That night I waited until Kyle fell asleep. He had come home around 9:30, later than usual for a Tuesday but not suspiciously so. He claimed to have gotten caught up in a conversation with his manager about an upcoming project. We ate the dinner I had prepared earlier, watched part of a documentary on Netflix and went to bed around 11. I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing even out into the steady rhythm of sleep. When I was certain he would not wake up, I slipped out of bed and walked quietly to our home office. I closed the door most of the way, leaving just enough gap that I would hear if Kyle got up and opened my laptop. My hands shook slightly as I followed Sarah's instructions, navigating through settings and permissions and backup files. At first I found exactly what I expected to find. Work emails about project deadlines and client meetings. Group texts with his college friends discussing weekend plans and sports scores. News articles he had saved to read later. Then I opened his messages with someone saved in his contacts as just Z. The preview showed the most recent message, sent earlier that evening while I was making dinner. Missing you already. Thursday can't come fast enough. I clicked to open the full conversation thread. The messages loaded slowly, scrolling back in time. I started at the beginning 11 months ago and began reading. The early messages were relatively innocent. Friendly exchanges about work projects. Professional but warm. Then the tone shifted. Compliments became more personal. Conversations extended late into the evening. Flirtation evolved into something explicit. I read message after message, watching my marriage dissolve in real time through digital text. They talked about hotels they had visited together, about romantic dinners at restaurants I had never heard of, about inside jokes that excluded me entirely. They sent each other photos I could not bring myself to look at for more than a few seconds before closing them. In one exchange from 2 months ago, Zoe asked Kyle if I suspected anything. His response appeared on my screen in that distinctive blue bubble. She doesn't have a clue. Danny is sweet but not exactly observant. I sat back in my desk chair and stared at those words. Sweet but not exactly observant. That was how my husband described me to his mistress. As someone too naive and unaware to notice what was happening in my own marriage. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark office, feeling something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. It was different from the shock I had felt 6 weeks ago when I first saw Zoe's message. This was colder. More certain. More final. Over the next several nights, I continued my digital investigation whenever Kyle was asleep or out of the apartment. I discovered a separate email account he had created using a variation of his name that I would never have thought to search for. The account was linked to a credit card I had no knowledge of. I accessed the statements through the email and found charges that painted a complete picture of his double life. Boutique hotels in our own city. Expensive restaurants with tasting menus and wine pairings. Jewelry stores where he had purchased gifts I had never received. On our 7th wedding anniversary 3 months ago, Kyle had given me a card with a sweet message and taken me to our regular neighborhood Italian place where we always went for special occasions. According to the credit card statement from that same week, he had spent 3 times that amount on a dinner with Zoe at an upscale steakhouse downtown. 2 days before our anniversary, he had purchased a bracelet from a boutique jewelry store. The charge was $847. More than my engagement ring had cost. Every charge was a fresh betrayal. Every line item on those statements represented a choice Kyle made to spend our money, our time, our life together on someone else. But I did not cry. I had moved past tears somewhere around the 3rd hotel receipt. Instead, I screenshot everything. I downloaded every statement as a PDF. I created folders within folders on my laptop, organizing the evidence with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case. My home office became a command center. My laptop glowed in the darkness night after night while Kyle slept peacefully in our bed, completely unaware that I was documenting every detail of his affair in the next room. The most damning evidence came from Kyle's digital calendar. He kept meticulous records of his schedule, color-coded by category. Work meetings were blue. Personal appointments were green. And there in purple were regular Thursday evening appointments listed only as Z. 7 to 11 at night. Sometimes later. Every single Thursday for the past 11 months. I cross-referenced those calendar entries with the credit card statements. The pattern was unmistakable. Thursday evenings meant hotel bars and expensive dinners. Thursday evenings meant the affair had a schedule, a routine, a predictable rhythm that Kyle had built into his life as casually as his morning coffee. Then I found something that made everything worse. 3 separate occasions in the past 6 months when Kyle had claimed to be traveling for business conferences. I remembered those trips clearly. The Chicago conference in March. The Seattle training in May. The Boston client meeting in July. I had driven him to the airport for 2 of those trips. I had texted him good morning and good night while he was supposedly away on business. I pulled up the credit card statements for those date ranges. There were no airline charges. No hotel bookings in Chicago or Seattle or Boston. Instead, I found charges at boutique hotels less than 15 miles from our apartment. Hotels with names like the Riverside Inn and the Metropolitan. Kyle had never left the city. He had been staying in local hotels with Zoe while I waited at home, texting him goodnight messages he probably read while lying in bed with her. The calendar also showed lunch meetings with Z 2 or 3 times a week. Coffee breaks marked in purple. Even a weekend getaway that Kyle had disguised as a work retreat. I remembered that weekend in June. Kyle had been apologetic about having to go, had promised to make it up to me. I had spent the weekend cleaning our apartment and catching up on work projects, believing he was at a company retreat 3 hours away. According to his calendar and credit card records, he had been at a bed and breakfast an hour outside the city with Zoe. They had built an entire relationship on stolen time and my trust. This was not a spontaneous mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a second life Kyle had been living parallel to ours, complete with regular dates and romantic getaways and future plans. In one message exchange, they discussed taking a vacation together to California once Kyle figured out how to explain being gone for a full week. I sat in my dark office looking at 11 months of deception laid out in calendar entries and credit card charges and text messages that called me sweet but not exactly observant. And I realized with absolute clarity that this was not just an affair. This was a calculated, sustained betrayal. This was Kyle choosing Zoe over me again and again, day after day for almost a year. I closed my laptop after reviewing those calendar entries and sat in the darkness of my home office, feeling the full weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me. 11 months of documentation spread across folders on my hard drive. 11 months of evidence that proved Kyle had been living 2 lives with calculated precision. The affair was not a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a sustained, deliberate choice he made every single day. But documentation alone would not protect me. I needed a plan for what came next. I needed to understand my legal options and how to safeguard myself financially before Kyle discovered that I knew everything. The problem was I had no idea where to start. I had never imagined needing a divorce attorney. That was something that happened to other people, not to me. I texted Sarah the next morning while Kyle was in the shower getting ready for work. I kept the message simple. I need to know what my options are legally. Can you recommend someone? Her response came back within 5 minutes. Jennifer Morrison. She's the best. Expensive but worth every penny. I'll text you her number. I saved the contact information to my phone and stared at it for a long time. Calling a divorce lawyer felt like crossing a line I could not uncross. As long as I was just collecting evidence, I could tell myself I was simply gathering information, protecting myself, preparing for possibilities. But the moment I contacted an attorney, I would be taking concrete steps toward ending my marriage. I would be making the betrayal real in a way it had not been before. I waited 2 days before calling. During those 2 days I continued my routine. I went to work, came home, made dinner, sat beside Kyle on the couch while he checked his phone constantly. I played my role as the clueless wife while my mind churned through questions I did not have answers to. What would divorce mean financially? Where would I live? How would we divide our shared assets? Would Kyle fight me or would he accept responsibility for destroying our marriage? On Friday afternoon, I finally called Jennifer Morrison's office from my car during my lunch break. A receptionist with a professional voice answered and asked how she could help me. I told her I needed to schedule a consultation to discuss asset protection. The phrase felt strange in my mouth, clinical and detached, like I was talking about business contracts rather than the end of my marriage. The receptionist checked the calendar and offered me an appointment the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I accepted and provided my contact information. When I hung up, my hands were shaking slightly. I sat in my car in the parking lot behind my office building and took several deep breaths before going back inside. That evening, I told Kyle I had a dentist appointment Tuesday morning and would be coming into work late. He was sitting on the couch with his laptop balanced on his knees, supposedly working on a presentation but probably messaging Zoe. He glanced up briefly when I spoke and said something vague like, "Okay, sounds good," before returning his attention to his screen. The casual disregard in that moment made my decision feel easier somehow. This man who once hung on my every word now barely registered my presence unless he needed something from me. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray, threatening rain. I dressed carefully for the appointment, choosing professional clothes that made me feel competent and in control. A black blazer over a gray blouse. Dark pants. Simple jewelry. I wanted to look like someone who had her life together, even though I felt like I was barely holding myself together most days. Jennifer Morrison's office was located in a downtown building that smelled like expensive carpet and air conditioning. I took the elevator to the 14th floor and found her suite at the end of a hallway lined with other legal offices. The reception area was understated but clearly high-end. Leather chairs. Modern art on the walls. A receptionist who smiled warmly and offered me coffee while I waited. Jennifer came out to greet me 5 minutes later. She was in her 50s with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob that framed her face. She wore a navy suit that looked custom-tailored and carried herself with the kind of calm competence that immediately put me at ease. She shook my hand firmly and guided me back to her office, which had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. She gestured to a leather chair across from her desk and I sat down, suddenly uncertain how to begin this conversation. Jennifer seemed to sense my hesitation. She poured us both water from a glass pitcher on her desk and sat back in her chair. "Sarah Mitchell speaks very highly of you," she said, her voice warm but professional. "Why don't you tell me what brought you here today?" I had rehearsed this conversation in my head during the drive downtown, but now that the moment had arrived, my prepared words felt inadequate. I reached into my bag and pulled out the flash drive I had spent the previous evening organizing. On it was everything I had collected over the past 2 months. Every text message I had screenshot. Every credit card statement I had downloaded. Every calendar entry I had documented. Every photo and hotel receipt and email exchange. I handed the flash drive to Jennifer. "My husband has been having an affair for 11 months. He doesn't know that I know. Everything is on here." Jennifer took the flash drive and plugged it into her computer without comment. She opened the files and began reviewing the contents with focused attention. I sat quietly and watched her face as she scrolled through folder after folder of evidence. Her expression remained neutral and professional, but occasionally she would make small approving sounds or jot down notes on a legal pad beside her keyboard. After 20 minutes of silence broken only by the clicking of her mouse and the scratching of her pen, Jennifer looked up and met my eyes. This is extremely thorough documentation. He has no idea you know about any of this. I shook my head. I've been acting completely normal. Playing the clueless wife he thinks I am. Jennifer smiled slightly. It was not a warm smile but rather one of professional appreciation, like a chess player recognizing a particularly clever move. Good. That gives us a significant advantage. The element of surprise is powerful in these situations. We spent the next hour discussing my options. Jennifer explained divorce procedures in our state, how marital property gets divided, how documented infidelity could influence court decisions in my favor. She asked detailed questions about our finances. Did we have shared bank accounts? What about retirement accounts? Investment portfolios? Who owned the car we drove? What about our apartment? I answered each question as thoroughly as I could, pulling up banking information on my phone when she needed specific details. Jennifer took notes constantly, building a complete picture of my financial situation and my marriage. The conversation turned to strategy. Jennifer explained that while I could file for divorce immediately based on the evidence I had collected, there were steps we could take beforehand to protect my interests and ensure I received a fair settlement. She talked about asset protection and timing and the importance of being prepared before Kyle knew what was coming. Your biggest shared asset is the apartment, Jennifer said, reviewing the financial information I had provided. You bought it 3 years ago. Both your names are on the deed. You split the mortgage payments evenly. I nodded. The apartment had been one of the proudest moments of our marriage. We had saved for years to afford the down payment. We had spent weekends painting the walls and choosing furniture. It was supposed to be our starter home, the place where we would live until we could afford something bigger when we started a family. Jennifer tapped her pen against her legal pad thoughtfully. If Kyle were to sign refinancing paperwork believing he was simply securing a better interest rate, he could actually be removing his name from the title without realizing it. I felt something shift in my chest. Is that legal? Perfectly legal, Jennifer said. As long as he signs voluntarily and has the opportunity to read what he's signing, there's no fraud involved. I can prepare documents that bury the critical language deep within standard financial jargon and legal clauses. Most people don't read these documents carefully. They trust their spouse and sign where they're told to sign. I thought about that for a moment. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt at the deception, at the idea of tricking Kyle into signing away his claim to our apartment. But then I remembered 11 months of hotel receipts. I remembered the bracelet he bought Zoe that cost more than my engagement ring. I remembered reading his message that called me sweet but not exactly observant. The guilt disappeared. If Kyle can build a secret life with Zoe using our money and our time, I can protect myself legally, I said. Jennifer nodded approvingly. I'll begin drafting the documents this afternoon. The key is making the refinancing offer seem legitimate and time-sensitive. You'll need to introduce the conversation naturally, create urgency around signing quickly, and make sure he doesn't have time or motivation to read the fine print carefully. We discussed the details for another 20 minutes. How I should present the refinancing opportunity. What reasons I should give for why we needed to act quickly. How to handle any questions Kyle might ask. Jennifer walked me through each scenario with the thoroughness of someone who had done this many times before. When I left her office an hour and a half after arriving, I had a flash drive full of evidence, a preliminary legal strategy and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath Jennifer's building and felt something I had not felt in months. Not happiness exactly, but purpose, direction. A sense that I was finally taking control of a situation that had controlled me for too long. 2 weeks later, everything was in place. Jennifer had prepared the refinancing documents with surgical precision. The apartment deed transfer was buried on page 17 of a 23-page document, surrounded by dense financial terminology and legal language that would make anyone's eyes glaze over. To a casual reader, it looked like standard refinancing paperwork. Only someone reading carefully would notice the clause that removed Kyle's name from the title entirely. I chose Sunday brunch to introduce the conversation. Kyle and I were sitting at our small kitchen table eating the pancakes I had made. He was checking his phone between bites, probably texting Zoe about their plans for the coming week. I kept my voice casual when I spoke. Oh, I meant to tell you. Our bank contacted me about refinancing options. Apparently, interest rates have dropped and we could save almost $300 a month if we restructure our loan. Kyle looked up briefly from his phone. Yeah. That sounds good. I can handle the paperwork if you want, I said. I just need you to sign a few forms. He nodded vaguely. Sure. Whatever you think is best. You're better at that stuff anyway. That casual dismissal of something as significant as refinancing our home told me everything I needed to know about how much attention Kyle was paying to our actual life together. He trusted me to handle the details while he focused on Zoe. The following Wednesday evening, I brought home the documents Jennifer had prepared. I had spent the afternoon creating artificial urgency, mentioning to Kyle that the rate lock expired at the end of the week and we needed to sign quickly or lose the opportunity. Kyle was sitting on the couch when I spread the papers across our coffee table. He glanced at them with the same distracted attention he gave most things related to our household. Where do I need to sign? I pointed to the tabs Jennifer had strategically placed throughout the document, marking each signature line with colorful flags that made the process seem simple and routine. Kyle picked up a pen and began signing without reading a single page. I watched his signature appear again and again, that familiar scrawl I had seen on birthday cards and anniversary notes in our marriage license. Each signature transferred a piece of our shared life entirely into my name. Within 15 minutes it was done. Sole ownership of our apartment had been legally transferred to me. Kyle set down the pen and went back to his phone, completely unaware of what he had just signed away. I gathered the signed refinancing documents from the coffee table after Kyle returned to scrolling through his phone. The papers felt heavier than they should have, weighted with significance he would not understand until much later. I placed them carefully in a folder and took them to my home office, adding them to the growing collection of evidence and legal documentation that now filled an entire drawer of my filing cabinet. For 3 months, I had been documenting Kyle's affair with clinical detachment, collecting evidence, building my case, protecting my assets. Everything had been methodical and controlled, driven by the need to understand the full scope of his betrayal before taking action. But that cold, careful approach was about to change because of 14 words that appeared on Kyle's phone screen on a Thursday evening in late November. Kyle had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to use the bathroom. I was standing at the sink washing dishes from the dinner we had just finished. His phone lit up with a notification, the screen glowing bright against the dark granite countertop. I glanced at it reflexively, the way you might glance at any light that suddenly appears in your peripheral vision. The message preview was from Zoe. Your wife really is clueless, isn't she? Must be so boring going home to someone who doesn't even notice when you're thinking about someone else. I stood there with my hands still in the soapy water, staring at those words. Something shifted inside me in that moment. All the careful detachment I had maintained for months cracked in a way it had not cracked before. It was one thing to know they were having an affair. It was one thing to read their messages planning hotel meetings and romantic dinners. But this was different. This was them actively mocking me, laughing at how stupid I was, making jokes about how boring I must be compared to their exciting secret relationship. The cold documentation I had been doing suddenly felt insufficient. Divorce would end my marriage and protect my assets, but it would not make them face real consequences for what they had done. It would not make their comfortable secret uncomfortable. It would not give them any reason to regret their choices beyond losing their respective spouses. I dried my hands slowly on a kitchen towel and picked up Kyle's phone. I took a photo of Zoe's message with my own phone before setting his device back down exactly where he had left it. When Kyle returned from the bathroom moments later, I was back at the sink finishing the dishes as though nothing had happened. That night after Kyle fell asleep, I went into my office and opened my laptop. I pulled up the mirrored messages from Kyle's phone and started reading through his conversations with Zoe with a different purpose than before. I was no longer just documenting evidence for divorce proceedings. I was looking for vulnerabilities, weaknesses in their carefully constructed affair that I could exploit. I found what I needed buried in a conversation from 2 weeks earlier. Kyle and Zoe had been discussing their upcoming Thanksgiving plans. Zoe had complained about having to spend the holiday with her husband's family. Kyle had responded sympathetically, saying something about how difficult it must be to maintain appearances at home. Her husband. Zoe was married. Kyle had never mentioned this detail to me, probably because acknowledging that Zoe had a husband would make their affair feel more wrong, would force him to confront the fact that they were not just betraying me but someone else as well. I searched through more messages until I found Zoe's last name. Patterson. Then I opened a new browser window and started searching social media. Within 10 minutes, I found her Facebook profile and confirmed what I already suspected. Zoe Patterson was married to Marcus Patterson. His profile was public, full of photos that told the story of their life together. Marcus was a high school teacher. His profile picture showed him standing in front of a classroom, smiling at whoever was taking the photo. There were vacation pictures from a beach somewhere tropical. Anniversary posts celebrating 5 years of marriage. Photos from what looked like a friend's wedding where Marcus had his arm around Zoe, both of them dressed up and smiling at the camera. I checked the date on that wedding photo. 6 months ago. Right around the time Kyle and Zoe had taken their weekend getaway to the bed and breakfast outside the city. While Marcus and Zoe were attending a wedding together, playing the happy couple for their friends, she was planning her next hotel meeting with my husband. I stared at Marcus's profile for a long time. He looked kind. The sort of person who posted encouragement to his students and shared articles about education reform. In one post from a few weeks earlier, he had written about how grateful he was for his wife's support during a difficult semester at work. The post had dozens of likes and comments. Zoe had even responded with a heart emoji. I felt an unexpected kinship with this stranger. Marcus had been living the same lie I had been living, trusting someone who did not deserve that trust, believing in a marriage that was built on deception. He deserved to know the truth just like I had deserved to know. More than that, Marcus represented an opportunity. If I told him about the affair and provided proof, he would almost certainly confront Zoe. That confrontation would create chaos in the careful bubble Kyle and Zoe had constructed. It would make their secret suddenly very public within their social circle and potentially their workplace. It would force them to face consequences beyond just divorce papers. I spent the entire weekend compiling an evidence package specifically designed for Marcus. I included hotel receipts that showed both Kyle and Zoe's names checked into the same room on the same dates. I included text messages where they discussed their encounters in explicit detail, removing any possibility of claiming the relationship was merely emotional rather than physical. I included credit card statements showing the gifts Kyle had purchased for Zoe, the expensive dinners they had shared, the wine they had ordered at hotel bars. I included photos they had exchanged with each other. Not the most intimate ones, which I could not bring myself to look at for more than a few seconds, but enough to make the physical nature of their relationship absolutely clear. I included calendar entries showing their regular Thursday evening appointments and the weekend trips they had taken together while lying to their respective spouses. I organized everything chronologically, creating a narrative that showed the affair's progression from friendly coworker exchanges to full-blown relationship conducted in hotel rooms and expensive restaurants. I wanted Marcus to see exactly what I had seen. I wanted him to understand the scope and duration of the betrayal, not just know that his wife had cheated but comprehend how deliberately and consistently she had lied to him. On Sunday evening, I composed a brief message to accompany the evidence. I kept it simple and direct. Your wife Zoe has been having an affair with my husband Kyle Brennan for 11 months. I thought you deserved to know the truth. All the evidence is attached. I am sorry you had to find out this way. I sent the email from an anonymous account Sarah had helped me create months earlier, one that could not be traced back to me. Then I closed my laptop and waited. The response came faster than I anticipated. Within 2 hours, Kyle's phone started buzzing constantly with incoming messages and calls from Zoe. I watched through my mirrored access as the panic unfolded in real time. Marcus knows everything, Zoe's first message read. He has proof. Screenshots and receipts and everything. How did he find out? Kyle responded immediately. What? How is that possible? What kind of proof? Hotel receipts with both our names. Our messages. Photos. Everything. Someone sent it to him anonymously. He's losing it. He's calling my boss. Kyle, what do we do? I sat in my office reading these messages while Kyle was in the living room watching a basketball game, completely unaware that his carefully constructed double life was collapsing around him. The satisfaction I felt was cold and sharp, nothing like the warm vindication I might have expected. This was not about revenge in the passionate sense. This was about consequences. This was about making sure that Kyle and Zoe could not simply walk away from their choices without facing any real repercussions. Over the next few days, I watched the situation spiral through the window of Kyle's mirrored messages. Marcus did exactly what I had hoped he would do. He forwarded all the evidence to the Human Resources Department at the marketing firm where both Kyle and Zoe worked. The company had strict ethics policies about workplace relationships, particularly affairs between colleagues that created conflicts of interest or hostile work environments. More importantly, they had policies about misuse of company resources. According to the increasingly frantic messages I intercepted between Kyle and Zoe, the HR investigation focused heavily on the personal charges they had made on company credit cards and the company time they had used to conduct their affair. Zoe was placed on administrative leave within a week. Kyle received a formal letter requiring him to meet with HR and provide an explanation for certain expense reports and calendar discrepancies. At home, he claimed to be dealing with complicated project deadlines and difficult clients. His stress was visible in ways he could not hide. He stopped sleeping well. He checked his phone even more obsessively than before. He snapped at me over small things then immediately apologized. I played my role perfectly, offering sympathy and support. "Work has been really stressful for you lately," I said one evening when he seemed particularly on edge. "Is everything okay?" "Just some personnel issues at the office," he said, which was technically true even if the personnel issue was his own misconduct. "Nothing for you to worry about." I nodded and changed the subject, all while knowing that his professional life was unraveling because of evidence I had compiled and sent to Marcus. Their comfortable secret was becoming a professional nightmare, and Kyle still had no idea that I had orchestrated all of it. The chaos I had triggered in Kyle and Zoe's professional lives continued to unfold throughout December. I watched it happen through the window of Kyle's mirrored messages, a spectator to the destruction I had carefully orchestrated. The HR investigation expanded beyond their initial concerns about misuse of company resources. Colleagues were being interviewed. Email servers were being searched for inappropriate communications. The comfortable affair that had existed in stolen moments and secret hotel rooms was now being examined under the harsh fluorescent lights of corporate policy enforcement. By mid-December, I knew it was time to move forward with the final phase. I had all the evidence I needed. The apartment was legally mine. Kyle's affair had become a professional liability that would likely cost both him and Zoe their jobs. Everything was in place except for the confrontation itself. The moment when Kyle would discover that the clueless wife he had been mocking for 11 months had actually been 10 steps ahead of him the entire time. I scheduled a final meeting with Jennifer Morrison for a Friday afternoon. When I arrived at her office, she had papers spread across her desk in organized stacks. Divorce filings with my signature already affixed. Asset documentation showing the apartment deed in my name alone. Bank account information proving our joint accounts were ready to be frozen on my instruction. A restraining order application that would prevent Kyle from contacting me except through legal counsel. Jennifer gestured to the chair across from her desk and I sat down. She had a calendar open on her computer screen, a weekly view showing the days ahead marked with various appointments and deadlines. "We need to choose a day for the confrontation," she said, her voice calm and professional as always. "The timing matters more than you might think. Psychology plays a significant role in how people process shock." I leaned forward slightly, curious about her reasoning. Jennifer had handled hundreds of divorce cases. She understood human behavior in crisis better than most therapists. "Tuesday morning," she continued, clicking on the calendar to highlight a date 2 weeks away. "People are still recovering from Monday, still tired, still lacking the optimism that builds as the week progresses toward the weekend. Tuesday is when people are most vulnerable to being emotionally overwhelmed. It is when their defenses are lowest." I looked at the date she had selected. January 7th. A cold, gray month when the holidays were over and nothing but winter stretched ahead. It felt appropriate somehow. "The accounts will freeze at 6 that morning," Jennifer said, making notes on a legal pad. "I will coordinate with your bank to ensure everything happens simultaneously. By the time Kyle wakes up, his access to your shared finances will be completely severed." She walked me through the logistics with the thoroughness I had come to expect from her. The divorce papers were already filed with the court, dated for that Tuesday morning. She had prepared all the documentation showing that the apartment was now solely in my name, complete with official stamps and signatures. The restraining order was ready to be activated the moment I felt it was necessary. "I want you to call me immediately if Kyle becomes aggressive or threatening in any way," Jennifer said, her gray eyes serious. "I do not anticipate violence based on what you have told me about him, but people can be unpredictable when they are cornered." I nodded. "Kyle has never been violent. Dishonest, yes. Selfish, absolutely. But not violent. He will be shocked and probably devastated, but he will not hurt me physically." Jennifer studied my face for a moment, perhaps assessing whether I was being naive about the man I had been married to for 7 years. Then she nodded and made another note on her legal pad. "Everything is ready," she said. "All that remains is for you to execute the plan we have built together. Are you prepared for what Tuesday morning will bring?" I thought about that question. Was I prepared? I had spent 11 months documenting evidence. I had played the role of the clueless wife so convincingly that Kyle had no idea I knew anything about his affair. I had protected my assets, built my case, and triggered the collapse of his relationship with Zoe. But confronting him directly, watching his face as he realized the scope of what I had done, that was different from all the careful preparation that had come before. "I am ready," I said and meant it. That Monday evening, Kyle texted me around 7 to say he was working late on an urgent project. I knew from his mirrored messages that he was actually meeting Zoe at a coffee shop across town, trying to strategize about the HR investigation that was threatening both their jobs. They were panicking, trying to align their stories, desperately attempting to minimize the damage to their careers. I used his absence to pack his belongings. I started in our bedroom closet, removing his clothes from the hangers one by one. His work shirts that I had ironed so many Sunday evenings. His jeans and casual wear. The suit he wore to important meetings. I folded each item carefully and placed them in the suitcases I had pulled down from our storage closet. I gathered his toiletries from the bathroom. His electric razor, his deodorant, his cologne that I had not chosen. I packed his books from the shelves in our living room, the novels he had been meaning to read and the reference books from his college days. I removed his laptop from the home office and placed it in his computer bag along with the charger and mouse he preferred. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the 7 years we had spent together. There had been good times before Zoe entered the picture. Vacations to places we had always wanted to visit. Lazy Sunday mornings reading the newspaper in bed. Inside jokes and shared dreams about the future. Those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to different people in a different lifetime. By midnight, I had 3 large suitcases packed and stacked neatly by our front door. The apartment looked strange without Kyle's things scattered around. His jacket was no longer draped over the back of the kitchen chair. His shoes were no longer by the door. The bathroom counter had space where his toiletries used to sit. It already felt more like mine than ours. Kyle came home around 12:30, exhausted and stressed. He barely glanced at me as he headed straight to the bedroom. I heard the shower running, heard him get into bed. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. He had no idea that tomorrow morning would be the last time he woke up in this apartment as someone who lived here. I stayed awake for another hour, sitting in the dark living room, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Then I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in months. My alarm went off at 5 Tuesday morning. I got up quietly, leaving Kyle still asleep, and made coffee in the kitchen. At 5:30, there was a soft knock on our apartment door. I opened it to find the locksmith Sarah had recommended, a middle-aged man with a toolbox and a discreet manner that suggested he had done this sort of work many times before. He changed both locks on our door within 20 minutes, working quietly and efficiently. When he finished, he handed me 2 sets of new keys and left without asking any questions. I stood alone in the hallway for a moment, holding those keys, feeling the weight of what they represented. Kyle no longer had access to this apartment. He no longer had a home here. I went down to the lobby and removed Kyle's name from our mailbox, leaving only mine on the small rectangular label. Then I returned upstairs and began the final preparation. I had printed everything the night before while Kyle was out meeting Zoe. Text messages arranged in chronological order, showing the progression of their affair from friendly colleagues to explicit lovers. Hotel receipts with both their names checked into the same rooms on the same dates. Credit card statements showing the gifts Kyle bought for Zoe, the expensive dinners they shared, the wine they ordered at hotel bars. Calendar entries highlighting their regular Thursday evening appointments and weekend getaways. Photos they had exchanged, evidence of the physical relationship they had maintained for 11 months while lying to their respective spouses. I spread all of it across our dining room table, arranging the papers so they told a complete story. Anyone looking at this display would understand immediately what had happened. There would be no room for denial or excuses or claims of misunderstanding. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. In the center of the table I placed a large manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers with my signature already in place waiting for his. The apartment deed showing only my name as owner. A copy of the refinancing documents he had signed without reading, the ones that had transferred his ownership stake to me. A restraining order that would prevent him from contacting me except through legal representation. On top of the envelope I placed a single sheet of paper with a note I had written the night before. The words were simple and direct. You were right about one thing, I was clueless for a while. But I have been watching for 11 months. Every lie. Every hotel. Every text message calling me too stupid to notice. The clueless wife you thought you married died the day Zoe sent that first message. You are now dealing with someone who documented everything. You have 30 minutes to take your suitcases and leave. I made fresh coffee and sat on the couch in the living room where I had a clear view of both the front door and the dining room table. At 6:30, Kyle's phone buzzed with a text message. I watched him stir in the bedroom, reach for his phone, read whatever message had just arrived. Probably Zoe, possibly something about the HR investigation. He typed a response and said he would be home soon. I knew from his mirrored messages that he had spent the night at a hotel again, unable to sleep, exchanging desperate texts with Zoe about whether their jobs could be saved. He had told her he needed to go home and shower and change clothes before going into the office. At 7 o'clock I heard his key scrape against the new lock that no longer recognized it. He tried several times. Then he knocked on the door, calling my name with confusion in his voice. I counted to 10, breathing slowly, preparing myself for what came next. Then I stood up and walked to the door, my hand steady as I reached for the handle. This was the moment I had been planning for 11 months. The moment when Kyle would finally understand exactly how much he had underestimated the wife he called clueless. I opened the door. Kyle stood in the hallway outside our apartment door, his key still in his hand, confusion written across his exhausted face. He looked exactly like someone who had spent the night at a cheap hotel worrying about his crumbling professional life, which is precisely what he had done according to the messages I had read on my laptop while he was gone. "Danny, why doesn't my key work?" he asked, trying the lock one more time as though repetition might somehow make it recognize the metal that no longer matched the mechanism inside. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured for him to enter, my face carefully arranged into an expression of perfect calm. Kyle walked past me into the apartment, and I watched his eyes take in the scene I had prepared. First, he noticed the 3 suitcases stacked neatly by the door. His suitcases packed with all his belongings. Confusion flickered across his features, his eyebrows drawing together as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Then his gaze moved to the dining room table, and I watched the exact moment when comprehension began to dawn. The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost comical, leaving him pale and suddenly looking much older than his 34 years. He took one step toward the table, then stopped as though his legs had suddenly forgotten how to carry him forward. His hands started to shake. He turned back to look at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound, like someone who had forgotten how language worked. I remained standing by the door, silent, letting him absorb what he was seeing. Letting the evidence speak for itself before I said anything that might give him an opportunity to construct a defense or an explanation. Kyle finally found his voice, though it came out rough and uncertain. "What is all this?" I closed the front door behind me and walked past him to stand near the dining room table. "Why don't you take a closer look?" He moved forward slowly, almost reluctantly, as though approaching something dangerous that might reach out and harm him if he got too close. When he reached the table, he stood looking down at the papers spread across its surface. I watched his eyes move over the printed text messages, the hotel receipts with both his name and Zoe's name clearly visible, the credit card statements highlighting charges at restaurants and jewelry stores. His hands hovered over the papers but did not touch them at first, as though physical contact might make them more real than they already were. Then he picked up one of the hotel receipts, the one from the boutique place downtown where he had stayed with Zoe while telling me he was at a conference in Chicago. He stared at it for a long moment, his hands trembling so badly the paper rustled audibly in the quiet apartment. Danielle, he said, and my name came out cracked and broken. I can explain. This is not what it looks like. I remained silent, waiting. Kyle set down the receipt and picked up another document, this one a printed screenshot of a text message conversation. I knew which one it was without looking. The conversation where Zoe asked if I suspected anything and Kyle responded that I was sweet but not exactly observant. That I did not have a clue. These are out of context, Kyle said, his voice gaining a desperate edge. Zoe and I are just friends. We work together. We talk about work stuff. This looks worse than it actually is. I reached across the table and pulled out one of the photographs from the stack. The one where Kyle and Zoe were clearly in a hotel room together, clearly engaged in activities that went far beyond friendship or professional collaboration. I held it up without saying a word. Kyle's face went even paler if that was possible. His mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he pivoted to a different strategy. Anger replaced desperation in his expression. You went through my phone? You spied on me? That is a complete violation of my privacy, Danielle. You had no right to do that. This is controlling behavior. This is manipulative. I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. After 11 months of lies, after spending our money on hotels and gifts for another woman, after building an entire secret life while calling me too stupid to notice, he had the audacity to claim that I was the one who had violated trust. You violated our marriage, I said, my voice calm and measured. You violated our vows. You violated my trust for 11 months while calling me clueless to your mistress. I documented what you chose to do. That is not a violation. That is protection. The anger drained out of Kyle as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind something that looked like panic. He set down the photograph with shaking hands and moved to the next stage of his emotional progression. Bargaining. Okay, he said, his words coming fast now, tumbling over each other in his haste to get them out. Okay, I messed up. I know I did. But we can fix this, Danny. I will end things with Zoe immediately. Right now. I will block her number. We can go to marriage counseling. I will do whatever it takes. Please just give me another chance. One more chance to make this right. I picked up the manila envelope from the center of the table and handed it to him. Kyle took it with hands that were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He opened the clasp and pulled out the contents. The divorce papers with my signature already in place. The apartment deed showing only my name as the legal owner. The refinancing documents he had signed 3 weeks ago without reading a single page. A copy of the restraining order ready to be activated if needed. He read through each document, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and finally a dawning horror as he understood what he was holding. When he reached the note I had written, the one explaining that I had been watching for 11 months and that the clueless wife he thought he married had never actually existed, his hands shook so hard the papers rattled. You have been watching for 11 months? He whispered, looking up at me with an expression I could not quite read. Betrayal, perhaps, which would have been darkly funny given the circumstances. You knew this whole time and you just let me keep doing it? I did not let you do anything, I said. You made your choices every single day for 11 months. I simply made sure I had complete documentation of every choice you made. The apartment is legally mine now through documents you signed without reading. Our joint accounts were frozen at 6 this morning. Your access to our shared finances is gone. Everything you thought was secure has been systematically removed while you were busy maintaining your affair with Zoe. Kyle stared at me as though he was seeing a stranger. In a way he was. The woman he thought he knew, the trusting wife who believed his explanations and never questioned his late nights. That woman had stopped existing the moment I found Zoe's first message. The person standing in front of him now had spent 11 months playing a role so convincingly that he had never suspected the performance. His legs seemed to give out. Kyle sank to his knees on our hardwood floor, still clutching the note I had written. Tears started streaming down his face, and he began crying in a way I had never witnessed during our 7 years together. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. Please, Danielle. Please. I love you. Zoe meant nothing. She was just a distraction, a stupid mistake. You are my wife. You are the one I want to be with. We can work through this. Please, just give me a chance to prove that I can be better. I looked down at him kneeling on the floor of what used to be our shared home, and I felt nothing but a clean, final certainty. No anger, no satisfaction, no vindication. Just the simple knowledge that this marriage was over and had been over since the moment he made his first choice to betray me. No, I said. The word came out quiet but absolute. Kyle looked up at me, tears still streaming down his face. What do you mean no? We can fix this. I know we can. No, we cannot, I said. The marriage is over, Kyle. The divorce papers are filed. This apartment is mine. You have 25 minutes to take your suitcases and leave. After that, I will call the police and file trespassing charges against you. You cannot be serious, he said, his voice breaking. 7 years together and you are just going to throw it all away? You are not even going to try. I walked to the front door and opened it, standing beside it in a clear gesture of expectation. You threw it away when you started sleeping with Zoe. You threw it away every Thursday night you lied about working late. You threw it away every time you called me clueless to your mistress. The wife you thought you married never existed. She was a performance I gave while I documented everything you did and prepared for this moment. Now you have 23 minutes to leave. Kyle stayed on his knees for another long moment, perhaps hoping I would change my mind or soften or show some sign of the woman he thought I was. When I remained standing by the open door, my expression unchanged, he finally got to his feet. He moved like someone in a dream, mechanical and uncertain. He picked up the first suitcase, then the second, then the third, stacking them awkwardly in his arms. He walked toward the door, then paused in the doorway to look back at me one final time. I am sorry, he said. I am so sorry for everything. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Kyle walked out into the hallway and I closed the door behind him, turning the new lock that his key would never open again. I stood at the window watching Kyle load his suitcases into his car. It was 7:43 in the morning. The parking lot below was quiet except for the sound of his car door opening and closing as he made trip after trip from the building entrance to his vehicle. After the third suitcase was loaded, he sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Even from 2 floors up, I could see his shoulders shaking. He had his head in his hands and he stayed that way for several minutes that felt much longer. Eventually, he started the car and pulled out of the parking space. I watched him drive toward the exit, watched his car turn right onto the main road, watched until he disappeared around the corner and there was nothing left to see but the empty parking space he had occupied every day for the past 3 years. The relief I felt was profound but quiet. Not triumphant or celebratory. Not the rush of victory I might have expected after 11 months of careful planning. Instead, it was simply the peace of finally setting down something unbearably heavy that I had been carrying for too long. Like the moment after you finish moving furniture when you suddenly remember what it feels like to have your arms empty and your shoulders relaxed. The apartment was completely silent. I walked slowly through each room, noticing details that had somehow become invisible during the years Kyle and I lived here together. The way morning light came through the bedroom window at this particular angle. The small scuff mark on the kitchen floor that we had always meant to fix but never got around to addressing. The view from the living room that looked out over the courtyard where children played in the afternoons. Everything looked different without Kyle's presence. The space felt larger somehow, as though removing him had added square footage that had not existed before. The air felt cleaner. The apartment felt more mine than it had felt in months, maybe years. My phone rang while I was standing in the middle of the living room. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I answered and heard her voice, urgent with concern. Are you okay? Did he leave? Do you need me to come over? I am fine, I said and realized as I spoke that it was true. Genuinely fine. Maybe for the first time in almost a year. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you want company? I can bring coffee. We can talk or just sit together. Whatever you need. I appreciated the offer more than I could adequately express. Sarah had been the one who taught me how to access Kyle's phone data. The one who connected me with Jennifer Morrison. The one who checked in constantly throughout the past 11 months while I maintained my performance as the clueless wife. But right now, I needed time alone before I started processing everything with other people. Can I have a few hours? I asked. I need to sit with this for a while before I start talking about it. Of course, Sarah said immediately. Call me when you are ready. Anytime, day or night. I will be here. After we hung up, I spent the morning systematically removing the remaining traces of Kyle from the apartment. The 3 suitcases I had packed contained most of his essential items, but there were still shared possessions scattered throughout our space that needed to be sorted and divided. I started with the photos. Framed pictures from our wedding hung in the hallway and sat on shelves in the living room. I took them down one by one, wrapping each frame carefully in newspaper before placing them in boxes. There were vacation photos from trips we had taken during better years. Anniversary dinner pictures from restaurants we had celebrated at before Zoe entered our lives. Casual snapshots of Sunday mornings and holiday gatherings and ordinary moments that had once felt special. I considered throwing some of them away. The wedding photos in particular felt like documentation of a promise that had been broken almost from the beginning, given that Kyle's affair had started less than 2 years after we exchanged vows. But ultimately I packed them all carefully and labeled the boxes with his name. They were evidence of a different time, and even though that time was gone and could never be recovered, it had still been real once. The books were easier to sort. Kyle had clear preferences in fiction that differed from mine. I packed his thriller novels and business books into boxes alongside the reference materials from his college days that he had insisted on keeping despite never looking at them. Kitchen gadgets he had purchased went into another box. Decorative items that reflected his taste more than mine came off shelves and went into storage. By noon, the apartment looked completely transformed. The walls had empty spaces where frames used to hang, pale rectangles showing where the paint had been protected from fading. The bookshelves had gaps where his collection used to sit. The kitchen had more cabinet space than I remembered having. But instead of feeling empty or diminished, the space felt ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to be filled with new memories and new belongings that would be mine alone. Jennifer Morrison called in the afternoon while I was taking a break from packing, sitting on the couch with a sandwich I had made but was not particularly hungry for. Her voice on the phone was crisp and professional as always. Kyle's attorney received the divorce filing this morning, she said. Everything is proceeding according to schedule. There is one issue I need to make you aware of. Kyle is attempting to contest the apartment deed transfer. I felt something tighten in my chest. On what grounds? He claims you tricked him into signing the refinancing documents without understanding what he was agreeing to. His attorney is arguing fraud and coercion. Will that work? I asked, my hand gripping the phone tighter than necessary. No, Jennifer said with absolute certainty. His signature is clear on every page of a legal document that he had every opportunity to read before signing. There is no evidence of coercion. You did not threaten him or force him in any way. He signed voluntarily because he trusted you and did not bother to read the paperwork carefully. That is not fraud. That is negligence on his part. The deed transfer will stand. Relief flooded through me. What happens next? The divorce proceeds as planned. Given the documented evidence of his infidelity and the fact that he has voluntarily vacated the marital residence, I expect everything to be finalized within 3 to 4 months. You will retain the apartment, your separate accounts, and your personal property. He will have no claim to any of it. Jennifer paused and I heard papers shuffling in the background. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that might have been satisfaction. There is additional information you might find relevant. Zoe Patterson was terminated from her position at the marketing firm yesterday afternoon. The Human Resources investigation found multiple policy violations. Misuse of company resources. Inappropriate workplace conduct. Fraudulent expense reports where she claimed personal charges as business expenses. The company had grounds to terminate for cause. I absorbed this information quietly. Part of me wondered if I should feel satisfaction or vindication at knowing Zoe had lost her job. But mostly I just felt distant acknowledgement that actions generate consequences. Kyle's position at the company became untenable after Zoe's termination, Jennifer continued. The investigation implicated him as well. He resigned this morning before they could proceed with disciplinary action against him. I also heard from a colleague that Marcus Patterson has filed for divorce from Zoe. Their affair has effectively destroyed 2 marriages and 2 careers. After I hung up with Jennifer, I sat on the couch for a long time thinking about the chain of events I had set in motion. Sending that evidence package to Marcus had triggered consequences that extended far beyond what I had initially anticipated. Kyle and Zoe had both lost their jobs. Marcus was divorcing Zoe. Kyle was moving out of the apartment we had shared. Everything they had built together had collapsed completely. I tried to examine my feelings about these outcomes and found mostly a profound neutrality. I was not happy about Kyle losing his job or about the professional destruction I had indirectly caused. But I was not sorry about it either. These were simply the natural consequences of choices Kyle and Zoe had made repeatedly over 11 months. They had constructed their affair during work hours using company resources. They had lied to their spouses while stealing time and money that belonged to shared lives. They had called me clueless while mocking my inability to notice what was happening. The consequences they faced were not my revenge. They were simply reality catching up to choices that had consequences they had not anticipated. The sun set on Tuesday evening while I was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, watching the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple through the living room window. The silence in the apartment was absolute. For the first time in 11 months I was not performing. I was not pretending to be the clueless wife who noticed nothing and suspected less. I was not documenting evidence or planning strategic moves or maintaining careful control over my reactions and my face and my words. I was simply sitting in my own space, feeling the weight of everything that had happened and everything that would come next. My phone buzzed periodically throughout the evening with messages from people who had somehow already heard that Kyle and I were separating. Sarah checked in again, offering support. My sister Emma called from Boston, her voice tight with concern and questions I was too tired to answer in detail. A few mutual friends sent carefully worded texts that tried to remain neutral while clearly fishing for information about what had happened. I responded briefly to each message, promising longer conversations later when I had processed things more thoroughly. For now, I needed the quiet. I needed to sit with the reality of my new life before I started explaining it to other people or answering questions about how I felt or what my plans were. I thought about Kyle waking up screaming when he arrived this morning and found his key no longer worked. I thought about his face when he saw the evidence spread across the dining table. I thought about him reading my note and realizing I had been watching for 11 months, documenting every lie, preparing for exactly this moment. The clueless wife he and Zoe had mocked was always the cleverest person in the room. That was the truth Kyle finally learned today. That was the truth I would carry forward into whatever came next, into the life I would build in this apartment that was now mine alone, into the future that belonged entirely to me. If this story of calculated revenge and quiet strength had you riveting from beginning to end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Danielle handed Kyle the envelope containing the divorce papers and watched him realize she had been documenting everything for 11 months. What was your favorite moment in this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Want more compelling stories of justice, betrayal, and resilience? Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one.